The widow opened her door to a stranger. By nightfall, he was guarding her like his own. Wyoming, 1886. A storm rolled across the plains like a herd of black cattle. Low thunder shaking the bones of the earth. Rain came down hard, beating against the cabin windows, hissing on the dying coals in the fire pit outside. Inside, Martha Hensley stitched the torn hem of a curtain by lamplight. Each gust of wind made the lamp flicker, throwing her shadow long across the floorboards. It had been 3 years since she'd buried her husband. 3 years of silence broken only by the wind and the creak of the rocking chair. The neighbors had long stopped checking in. She kept to herself, worked the land as best she could, and prayed the roof would last another winter. A sharp knock split the night. Once, twice, then a pause. She froze. Nobody came up this trail after dark, not unless they were lost or meant harm. The dog, an old shepherd mix, gave a low growl from under the table. Another knock, this time weaker. Martha rose, hand tightening around the iron poker near the hearth. The sound of the wind filled the silence as she stepped to the door. "Who's there?" A man's voice, rough with cold and travel. "Just looking for shelter, ma'am. Storm caught me off the trail." Something in his tone, steady, not pleading, made her hesitate. She opened the door a crack. Lightning flashed, lighting his face for a heartbeat. A tall man, soaked through, coat torn at the shoulder, hat brim dripping. Blood ran dark down his arm. He swayed slightly, catching the doorframe for balance. "Ain't looking for trouble," he said. The dog barked once, sharply. Martha's eyes caught the insignia stitched to his coat sleeve. U.S. Army. Faded, but still there. She remembered her husband's stories about soldiers passing through. Some good, most broken. "You're hurt," she said, more to herself than him. "A bullet grazed me. Didn't plan on stopping, but the horse went lame a mile back." The rain picked up again, slamming against the walls. She looked past him into the dark, then back at his pale face. Something in the man's eyes, tired but not cruel, made her nod once. "Come in then. Leave your boots by the door." He stepped inside, water pooling on the floorboards. The room shrank around his size and silence. She guided him to the table, poured a small cup of whiskey, and handed it to him. "Name's Martha Hensley," she said. He took a slow sip, wincing as the liquor burned. "Jonas Pike. Where were you headed?" "Nowhere in particular." He tried a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just west." Martha found a clean rag and a needle from her sewing kit. "That wound needs stitching." He nodded once, quiet as she worked. The sound of rain filled the space between them. His hand trembled once when the needle bit skin, but he didn't make a sound. "You're used to pain," she said softly. "Had my share." Lightning flashed again. For a moment, she saw the scar along his jaw, the tired set of his mouth. A man who'd seen too much and expected little more. When she finished, he flexed his arm, testing it. "You did fine work," she shrugged. "Learned enough from mending hides." He looked toward the door as thunder rolled again. "You live out here alone?" She paused before answering. "Since my husband passed, he didn't come back from a boundary dispute. Folks say it was an accident." Jonas met her eyes. "And you?" "I stopped believing in accidents." For a long while, neither spoke. The fire crackled, and the wind sighed against the roof. Finally Martha stood, poured another cup of coffee, and slid it to him. You can stay till the storm eases, she said. Then you move on. Jonas nodded. That's fair. Outside, the thunder rolled farther away, but the wind still carried something uneasy, like the land itself was holding its breath. Martha closed the door, shutting out the storm. The lamplight swayed, and for the first time in years, she wasn't alone in the cabin. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed and quiet. The plains stretched under a silver sky, puddles glinting between the sagebrush. The smell of wet earth filled the air. Martha stood by the stove, frying corn cakes and boiling coffee. Jonas sat nearby, his bandaged shoulders stiff, watching her move. He'd cleaned himself up some, hair combed, coat hung to dry by the fire. Without the mud and shadows, he looked less like a drifter and more like a man trying to outrun something. Didn't mean to trouble you, he said finally. You didn't, she replied. The storm did. He gave a small, tired smile. That storm follows me more often than it should. Martha said nothing. She set a plate before him, then took her own seat. They ate in silence, the only sound the scrape of forks and the hiss of the stove. When he finished, Jonas reached for his hat, but his arm faltered. She noticed. You shouldn't travel yet, she said. You'll tear those stitches. I'll manage, he answered, though he didn't stand. She looked toward the window. The fields outside lay empty, but her voice softened when she spoke again. You rode in from the north. Did you pass a big ranch? White fence? Cattle? Branded with a C? Yeah, big outfit. Rich man, by the look of it. Name's on the gate. Finch. Martha's eyes hardened. Carter Finch. You know him? I know his kind, she said. He's been trying to buy this land since the year my husband died. Says the water spring on my edge belongs to him. Jonas frowned. You ever think of sellin'? She met his gaze. And go where? This land's the only thing I've got left of my husband. Finch can't scare me off it. Jonas didn't reply, but his jaw tightened. He had the look of a man who knew bullies too well. After breakfast, he went outside, checking the horse tied under the lean-to. The animal limped, but would live. Martha followed, arms crossed against the chill breeze. Your horse'll need a day or two, she said. You can chop some wood if you're set on earning your keep. He nodded once. Fair trade. She watched him work, measured quiet swings of the axe, each strike even. There was something practiced in the way he moved, not hurried, not wasteful. Every motion belonged to a man who'd done hard labor before, maybe too much of it. By midday, smoke rose from the chimney again, and warmth returned to the cabin. Jonas kept to himself mostly, speaking only when needed, but the silence between them had changed. It wasn't sharp anymore, just steady, like the sound of rain far off. Late afternoon brought the first sign of trouble. Martha was at the window when she saw the dust trail, a pair of riders approaching slowly from the ridge. She set her cup down. We've got company. Jonas looked up, hand instinctively near his coat. Friends of yours? Not likely, she said. The riders stopped near the gate. One wore a tan coat. The other carried a rifle loosely across his lap. Their horses pawed the ground impatiently. The man in the tan coat called out, Afternoon, Mrs. Hensley. You get through that storm all right? Martha stepped to the porch but didn't smile. I did. What do you want, Tom? Tom grinned, showing too many teeth. Mr. Finch sent me to check on you. He's still waiting on your answer about the property line. I gave my answer last month, she said. Tom's grin faded. That spring doesn't belong to you, Martha. Be smart. Sell while he's still paying fair." Jonas stepped into view beside her, silent but steady. The rider's eyes flicked to him. Tom raised a brow. "Didn't know you had company." "Just a traveler?" Martha said evenly. Jonas didn't speak, but his gaze didn't waver. Something about it made the men shift uneasily. Tom spat in the dirt. "Tell your friend he might want to ride on before he gets caught up to local business." Martha's voice was calm. "He's mending from a wound. You can tell Mr. Finch that trespassing won't make me change my mind." Tom stared another moment, then jerked the reins. "You suit yourself, widow. Don't say we didn't warn you." The two men turned back toward the ridge, hooves kicking up mud. When they were gone, Jonas spoke softly. "They'll be back." "I know," Martha said. "They always come back." He looked at her then, truly looked, and saw the strength behind her calm. The storm had left her standing, and so had grief and fear, and all the long winters since. And for the first time since he'd knocked on her door, Jonas Pike felt something stir in him, something that wasn't weariness, a promise. Evening came early that day. The clouds hung low again, heavy and bruised with the weight of another storm. Inside the cabin, Martha lit the lamp and set a kettle to boil. Jonas sat near the window sharpening a small hunting knife. The rasp of the whetstone was slow and steady, like breathing. "They'll ride back tonight," he said quietly. Martha didn't look up. "You sound certain." "I've seen men like that before," Jonas replied. "They test the door first. If it holds, they come with fire next." Her hands paused on the kettle handle. "You talk like you've lived this before." He met her gaze. "Too many times." The kettle began to hiss, breaking the silence. Martha poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to him. "Then you know what to do." He nodded, but his eyes drifted toward the small window overlooking the field. "I do, but it's been a while since I wanted to." For a while they said nothing more. The wind picked up again, whistling through the cracks in the walls. The old dog growled low from his place near the hearth. Martha broke the silence. "You mentioned the army. Were you still serving when you got shot?" Jonas's jaw tightened. "Not exactly. I was passing through the old country when a man recognized me. Decided I owed him a debt. Bullets settled it quicker than words." She frowned. "A debt?" Jonas didn't answer right away. His thumb ran along the knife's edge. "During the war, I followed orders that shouldn't have been given. A colonel named Finch led us into a valley full of settlers. Called them traitors. They weren't. When the smoke cleared, I left the uniform behind." Martha froze. "You said Finch?" "Carter Finch," he said, voice low. "I'd hoped I'd never see that name again." The air between them changed. The storm outside seemed to draw closer. Martha set her cup down. "That's the same man trying to take my land." Jonas nodded. Figures he'd moved from killing for the flag to killing for fences. For a long while, the only sound was the ticking of the clock and the restless wind. "Then he'll know you," Martha said quietly. Jonas looked away. "Maybe. But I doubt he remembers faces that weren't worth promoting." "You underestimate how much cruel men remember their sins," she replied. He gave a faint, humorless smile. "You might be right." Outside, thunder rolled again, distant but steady. Martha stood and went to the window. The last of the daylight caught the wet grass, turning it to silver. Somewhere out there, men were waiting for nightfall. She could almost feel their eyes on the cabin. "You should go," she said suddenly, "before they find you here. You've got no reason to fight my battles." Jonas rose slowly, holstering the knife. "You gave me shelter when I had nothing. That's reason enough." She faced him, her voice trembling despite herself. "I don't want another man dying for this land. Not again." Jonas stepped closer, his expression steady but not hard. "Sometimes land ain't what's worth defending." Their eyes met for a long moment. Then Martha turned away, pretending to be busy herself with the fire. Outside, lightning cracked across the plains. The dog barked, one sharp warning. Jonas moved to the door and peered out. 2 riders were at the edge of the property again, this time dismounting. Their torches burned orange in the wind. "Martha," he said quietly, "get the rifle." She hesitated for just a second before pulling her late husband's rifle from above the hearth. Jonas checked the chamber, then nodded. "They're not here to talk." She swallowed hard. "What'll you do?" He took a breath, his voice low but calm. "What I said I'd never do again." He opened the door a crack, rain spilling in, and stepped out onto the porch. The air smelled of lightning and dust. His shadow stretched long across the wet ground. The 2 riders called out again, their voices sharp in the wind. Martha stood behind him, clutching the rifle tight. Jonas said nothing. He just waited, like a man listening for a sound he already knew too well. The thunder rolled closer, and the storm returned in full. The first gunshot broke the night. The crack of the rifle echoed across the valley. Martha flinched as splinters burst from the porch rail beside Jonas. He didn't move, just leveled his gaze toward the ridge where the flash came from. "Stay low," he said quietly. She dropped beside the door frame, heart pounding in her throat. Jonas raised his revolver, fired once, and the light on the ridge went out. A distant shout followed, then silence. Rain poured harder now, washing over the land like it meant to drown the noise. "They're testing us," Jonas muttered, "trying to see if we'll scare easy." Martha gripped the rifle tightly. They picked the wrong night. He gave a short nod, glancing at her with something close to respect. "You shoot?" "My husband taught me before he died. Said a woman alone ought to know the sound of her own gun." Jonas's mouth curved slightly. "Smart man." They waited in the dark. Only the hiss of rain and the steady breathing of the dog filled the silence. Then came the sound of horses moving closer. 3 now, maybe 4. Jonas ducked back inside. "They're coming in close. We'll make this place look empty." He doused the lamp with a quick puff of breath, leaving the cabin dimly lit by the flicker of the hearth. Shadows stretched deep across the walls. Martha crouched by the window, rifle steady. Outside, men's voices rose, low, joking, confident. "Looks quiet enough," one said. "Reckon she's scared off." Another laughed. "Wouldn't be the first widow to pack up and run." A third voice, deeper, crueler, cut through them. "No, she's here. I can smell the smoke. You boys remember the boss's orders. No fires, no bodies. Just make sure she signs over that land tomorrow." Jonas's face darkened. He knew that voice. Even soaked and far off, the drawl was unmistakable. Carter Finch. Jonas whispered. He came himself. Martha's eyes widened. "You're sure?" I'd know that voice in my grave. Jonah said. Lightning flashed again, showing the men fanning out, rifles in hand. Jonas motioned for Martha to move behind the stove. Stay out of sight. If they break through, you shoot, only if you have to. What about you? He slipped out the back door before answering, melting into the night. Martha pressed her back against the wall, clutching the rifle so hard her knuckles went white. The seconds stretched long. Rain hammered the roof. Then she heard it, scuffling near the barn. A man cursed softly. She aimed through the window and fired once. A scream followed. Then a body thudded into the mud. The dog barked wildly. From somewhere near the corral, Jonas shouted, "Down!" Gunfire exploded on both sides of the cabin. Bullets punched through the wooden walls, shattering dishes, splintering shelves. Martha dropped flat as plaster dust rained down. Jonas moved through the dark, like he'd been born there, firing short, measured shots between lightning flashes. The smell of gunpowder mixed with rain and smoke. When the firing paused, Martha dared a glance outside. She saw one rider limping toward his horse, another crawling away through the mud. Jonas appeared again at the porch, soaked and breathing hard. That's two down. Finch is keeping the rest back for now. Martha rose slowly, trembling. You could have been killed. He shrugged. Wouldn't be the first time. She stared at him, the calm in his eyes, the quiet steadiness that didn't belong to a reckless man, but to one who'd already made peace with dying. What are they after, Jonas? She asked. Why go to such trouble? He holstered his gun, wiping rain from his face. Because Finch doesn't like being told no, and because this land has something he wants more than money. The water, Jonas nodded. That spring runs clear through this valley. You hold it, you own everything for 10 miles. Martha's voice broke. He killed my husband for it, didn't he? Jonas didn't answer. He didn't need to. The storm raged louder, wind slamming the shutters like fists. Martha looked toward the door, where Jonas now stood guard again. You said you'd never pick up a gun again. I said I'd never fight another man's war. He said softly, This one's mine. She wanted to speak, but no words came. Only the crackle of the fire and the steady drip of rain off his hat brim. Outside, in the blackness, the sound of retreating hooves faded, but both of them knew it wasn't over. Martha stepped beside him, staring out into the night. They'll come at dawn. Jonas's voice was calm. Then we'll be ready. The dawn came slow and gray, spreading over the wet land like smoke. Mist clung to the fields, hiding the horizon. The air smelled of ash and rain. Jonas hadn't slept. He stood outside the cabin with the rifle slung over his good shoulder, eyes scanning the tree line. His shirt was torn, his face drawn with fatigue, but his stance was steady. Inside, Martha moved quietly, setting bread and coffee on the table. She glanced at him through the window, her expression unreadable. He looked like a man waiting for judgment. When he came in, the warmth of the fire made the chill rise off his coat in steam. They're still out there, he said. Camped by the ridge. Maybe 4, maybe 6, Martha nodded. They won't leave without what they came for. He sat down, rubbing his temples. Finch wants me as much as your land. She frowned. Because of the war? Jonas gave a tired nod. I deserted after that massacre. He made sure my name stayed black. Guess it's a stain he doesn't want seen again. Then he'll kill you to keep it quiet, she said. He met her eyes. That's the idea. For a moment neither spoke. Then Martha set her hands on the table. Then we fight, not to kill, but to keep what's ours. Jonas studied her face. There was no fear there anymore, only resolve, plain and steady. You ever done that before? He asked. Every day since he put my husband in the ground, she said. A long silence followed. Then Jonas gave a slow nod. All right then, they worked together through the morning. Jonas showed her how to wedge boards against the windows, how to set trip lines by the path. Martha fetched old nails, wire, and lamp oil. She moved with the quiet purpose of someone who had done hard work all her life. The dog followed them, restless but alert. By midday, the cabin looked different, tighter, sharper, like a small fortress. Against the open plains, Jonas knelt by the back door, setting a small lantern under a bucket of oil. If they rush the porch, we'll give 'em fire. Martha watched him. You've done this before. He didn't look up. Too many times. Only difference now is I ain't doing it for pay. When they stopped for a breath, Martha poured water into a tin cup and handed it to him. Their fingers brushed, just for a second, and something unspoken passed between them. She said quietly, You don't have to stay, Jonas. You could ride out tonight, while the mist still covers the road. He looked at her then, really looked, and leave you to face Finch alone. I've done worse alone. Jonas's voice softened. Maybe it's time you didn't have to. For a long moment, they just stood there, the stormlight still in their eyes. Two people bound not by promise but by shared stubbornness. Then from far off, the faint sound of hooves broke the stillness. Martha turned toward the sound. They're coming. Jonas's hand went to his revolver. Yeah, and Finch rides with 'em. The dog barked once, sharp and low. Martha checked the rifle's chamber, fingers steady now. You said you didn't want to kill again. Jonas nodded. I still don't, but I'll do what's needed. The riders appeared at the ridge. 5 this time, silhouetted against the gray morning. Finch was at the center, tall in the saddle, his black coat rippling in the wind. Jonas stepped forward to the porch, calling out, You don't need to do this, Finch. The man laughed, a dry sound that didn't reach his eyes. Jonas Pike. Didn't expect to find a ghost playing house with a widow. Jonas's jaw tightened. You left a few ghosts yourself. Finch smiled thinly. You walked away from your duty. That makes you mine to hang. As for the lady, she'll sign that deed before sundown. Martha stepped beside Jonas, rifle steady. Over my dead body. Finch's smile vanished. That can be arranged. He raised his hand. His men began to spread out, circling the cabin. Jonas leaned toward her, his voice low. Once they get close, they'll try to flush us out. Don't shoot till you have to. Martha nodded. And if they burn us in. Jonas's eyes were cold now. Then they'll burn with us. Lightning flashed somewhere beyond the ridge. The smell of rain rose again on the wind. Finch dismounted slowly, his boots sinking in the mud. You can't win, Pike. You never could. Jonas's grip tightened on his gun. Maybe not, but this time, I'm not fighting for orders. The first drop of rain fell between them, and then once again, the storm began. The rain came in hard sheets, washing the color out of the land. The riders moved like shadows through the mist, their torches flickering orange against the gray morning. Jonas stood on the porch, soaked through, eyes sharp as flint. Martha crouched inside by the window, rifle steady, breath slow and quiet. The wind carried Finch's voice across the distance. "Last chance, widow. Sign that paper and nobody gets hurt." Martha called back, her voice clear and strong. "I don't sign nothing for a thief and a liar." A few of Finch's men laughed, but the sound was nervous. They'd seen what Jonas could do last night. Jonas whispered through the open door, "Keep down. They'll start shooting soon." He loaded his revolver again, each click loud in the silence before the storm broke. A single gunshot cracked the air. A bullet hit the doorpost, inches from his head. Then all hell broke loose. Jonas returned fire, fast and controlled. Martha aimed from inside, taking down a rider who'd tried to flank the barn. Smoke filled the cabin. The smell of gunpowder and wet wood mixed in the air. "Two down," Jonas muttered. "They'll circle from the east next." He darted around the side of the cabin, moving low through the rain. Martha stayed where she was, watching through the fogged window. Every few seconds, lightning lit the field. Brief flashes showing the men closing in. From the ridge, Finch shouted, "Pike, you can't hide behind that woman forever." Jonas fired back, his voice rough with fury. "Ain't hidin', just waitin' for you to come close enough." Thunder rolled across the valley, swallowing the sound of gunfire. Inside, Martha reloaded with shaking hands. Her shoulder ached from the recoil, but she didn't stop. She thought of her husband, the way he'd stood on this same porch once, facing the same threat, and how Finch's men had ridden away, laughing when it was over. Not this time. She saw one of them creeping through the mist near the woodpile. She fired once and he dropped without a sound. Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. Outside, Jonas ran from cover to cover, rain dripping from his hat. He'd moved like this before, too many times. Every instinct told him this fight was old business, finally catching up. He heard Finch shout again, closer now. "You were a coward then, Pike. You deserted your own men." Jonas ducked behind the wagon, firing once, twice. "No, Finch. I walked away from you." A bullet tore through the wagon board beside him. He rolled to the ground, mud splashing up. When he looked up again, Finch was only 30 yards away, pistol drawn. Jonas fired, but the hammer clicked empty. He cursed under his breath, reaching for another round. Finch's voice was calm, cold. "You could have been a hero, Pike. Instead, you're dying for a woman who doesn't even know what you are." Martha's voice cut through the rain. "I know enough." She stepped out onto the porch, rifle raised. Finch swung his pistol toward her, but Jonas lunged from the mud, tackling him hard. Both men went down in the dirt. The pistol fired once into the air. The two men struggled, rolling through the mud and rain. Finch was older but strong, rage driving every punch. Jonas fought with the quiet desperation of a man who'd carried guilt too long. "You think you're different from me?" Finch spat. "You killed for orders, same as I did." Jonas's voice came between gasps. "Maybe so, but I stopped." He landed a blow that sent Finch sprawling back. Finch grabbed for his pistol again, but Jonas kicked it away. From the porch, Martha shouted, "Jonas!" He turned just in time to see another rider behind Finch, rifle aimed at his back. She fired first. The shot cracked through the rain, and the rider fell dead before he could pull the trigger. Jonas froze for half a second, then looked toward her. She was shaking, but her aim hadn't wavered. "Good shootin'," he said. Finch took the moment to swing a broken board at Jonas, striking his shoulder. Jonas staggered, the wound reopening. Pain flashed across his face. Finch rose to his feet, breathing hard. "Should have stayed buried, Pike." Jonas straightened slowly, mud dripping from his coat. "You first." Lightning flared, then a gunshot. Finch jerked, eyes wide, staring down at the dark stain spreading across his chest. Jonas's revolver smoked in his hand. The rancher fell to his knees, choking on rain and blood. "You'll hang for this." Jonas's voice was quiet. "Maybe. But I'll sleep tonight." Finch toppled into the mud, the rain washing over him until the ground turned red. For a long time, neither Jonas nor Martha spoke. The wind softened and the thunder drifted away into the distance. The storm was over. The rain slowed to a steady drizzle, soft against the roof and the fields. Smoke drifted from the rifle barrel in Martha's hands. She stared out into the open land where Finch had fallen, the water running dark around his body. Jonas stood still for a long moment, his chest heaving, the revolver hanging loose at his side. He looked like a man pulled back from the edge of something he'd sworn never to touch again. Finally, Martha spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "Is it done?" Jonas nodded once. "It's done." She lowered the rifle, her arms trembling from the weight and the shock. The dog crept out from under the porch, sniffing the air, sensing the fight was over. One of Finch's men, still alive, crawled through the mud toward his horse. Jonas stepped forward and kicked the man's gun out of reach. "Take your horse," he said coldly. "Ride to town. Tell the sheriff what happened. And tell him Finch ain't running this valley anymore." The man scrambled up, too scared to argue, and galloped off into the mist. When he was gone, silence fell, deep, heavy, and final. Martha sank onto the porch steps, staring at her muddy hands. "I thought I'd feel glad," she said softly, "but I just feel tired." Jonas holstered his gun, then knelt beside her. "That's what the end of fightin' feels like. Not joy, just peace." She looked up at him. "You didn't have to stay, Jonas. You could have ridden on." "I did ride on," he said quietly. "For years. Never found a place worth stoppin' till now." The wind carried the faint smell of wet earth and pine. The storm clouds were breaking, and a few thin beams of sunlight touched the far hills. Martha watched them, her eyes distant. "He killed my husband, didn't he?" "Finch." Jonas's silence was answer enough. Her breath caught, but she didn't cry. She just nodded once, slowly. "I knew it in my bones." Jonas looked down at the ground, voice low. "Your husband stood up to him. He paid the price most honest men do out here." She turned to him. "And what about you? What'll the sheriff say when he hears you killed a man?" Jonas shrugged. "Maybe he'll arrest me. Maybe he won't. But Finch's words don't carry weight anymore. I'll tell the truth and let it land where it lands." She studied him for a long moment, seeing the weary lines around his eyes, the scar at his jaw, the pain that had never fully left. "You're not the same man you were back then," she said. He gave a tired smile. "Maybe not, but that man's shadow still follows me." She looked at him then. Not as a stranger, not even as a drifter, but as someone who'd earned a place at her table. Then stay a while, she said softly. Let the sun catch up to you. Jonas hesitated. He glanced toward the open plains, where the horizon seemed endless. Then he looked back at her. You sure you want a man like me under your roof? I've had worse company, she said, her voice gentle but sure. The dog barked once, tail wagging as if to agree. Jonas chuckled for the first time since the storm began. It was a rough sound, rusty from disuse, but real. They sat there on the porch as the clouds slowly cleared. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of rain and sage. Martha broke the silence. You ever think about going back east? Jonas shook his head. There's nothing back there worth remembering. Out here, at least a man's sins wash away when it rains. She smiled faintly. Then maybe this storm did us both some good. He leaned back against the porch post, eyes half closed. Maybe it did. For a while, they just listened to the world breathe again. The creak of wet wood, the drip of water from the eaves, the distant sound of a bird calling somewhere beyond the ridge. Martha looked toward the rising light, her voice soft as a prayer. He's gone now. The land's ours again. Jonas opened his eyes. It always was. Finch just forgot what that meant. She turned to him, a small smile forming. And you reminded him. Jonas looked down at his hands, then at the horizon. Guess I reminded myself too. The rain stopped completely. A single beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, landing on the cabin door where his army insignia still hung, torn and faded. Jonas stared at it for a long time. Then he reached up, pulled it free, and set it on the porch rail. Some things ain't worth carrying anymore, he said quietly. Martha nodded. Then leave it there. He did. The storm had passed, but its mark would stay, in the mud, in the air, and in the hearts of the two people who'd survived it. Morning light crept across the valley like a slow-moving tide. The sky was pale gold, and the smell of wet earth lingered in the air. Inside the cabin, Martha moved quietly, setting the kettle on the stove. The fire popped and hissed as it came back to life. Jonas sat near the door, cleaning the mud from his revolver. His shirt was torn, his face marked with dried blood and smoke. He looked like a man who had walked through a storm and found himself still standing on the other side. Neither spoke for a while. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was a kind of peace neither had known for a long time. Finally, Martha poured 2 tin cups of coffee and placed one on the table beside him. You'll need a fresh start, she said softly. The sheriff will be here soon, Jonas nodded. I'll tell him what happened. She met his eyes, and after that, he looked down into the black coffee, the steam curling upward. After that, I'll move on. Always figured that's what I do best. Martha smiled faintly. Doesn't seem to be working too well for you. He almost smiled back. You might be right about that. Outside, the sound of hoofbeats echoed faintly down the trail. Jonas turned toward the window. That'll be him. Martha followed his gaze. You sure you want to face this alone? I've been running long enough, he said. Time to stand still for once. The sheriff arrived with 2 deputies. They rode up slowly, hands near their holsters but not drawn. The sheriff, a tall man with gray whiskers and kind eyes, dismounted first. Morning, Martha, he said. Heard there was trouble. There was. she answered. It's over now. The sheriff's gaze shifted to Jonas. And you must be the stranger Finch had his men whispering about. Jonas stood up, meeting his eyes without flinching. Name's Jonas Pike. Used to ride under Finch in the army. He came here last night with his men. Tried to force her off her land. I shot him. Self-defense. The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then looked at Martha. Is that true? She nodded. Every word. The sheriff sighed and rubbed his chin. Well, I can't say Finch didn't have this coming. Man's been stirring up trouble for years. I'll need to take your statement, both of you. But I reckon you won't be leaving town in chains, Mr. Pike. Jonas nodded once. Appreciate that, Sheriff. The sheriff tipped his hat and signaled to his men. They began loading Finch's body onto a wagon. The sound of chains and wood filled the air for a moment, sharp and final. As they worked, Martha stepped close to Jonas. You don't have to go, she whispered. The sheriff said you're free. Jonas didn't answer right away. His eyes were on the horizon beyond the hills, where the sky stretched open and endless. Freedom's a funny thing, he said. Sometimes you earn it, and still don't know what to do with it. Martha touched his arm. Then maybe you start small. Fix the fence. Feed the dog. Stay for supper. He looked at her hand, then at her face. There was no pity there, only quiet strength. I don't know if I belong anywhere, he admitted. She smiled. Then this is as good a place as any to find out. The sheriff finished his business and tipped his hat again. Martha, Jonas, you two take care. They watched the wagon roll away, its wheels sinking deep into the wet ground until it disappeared down the ridge. When the sound faded, Jonas exhaled slowly. The valley was silent again, peaceful, alive. Martha turned back toward the cabin. Coffee's still hot, she said. Jonas followed her inside. The warmth met him like an old friend. He sat at the table, watching her move about the kitchen with calm, steady motions. There was something healing in it, something that spoke louder than words. Martha set a plate of biscuits between them. They're not much, she said. Jonas picked one up, tore it in half. They're enough. They ate quietly, while the fire crackled, the light dancing across the cabin walls. Outside, a new day was waking, the first one in a long time that didn't feel heavy with ghosts. Jonas looked around the small cabin, the worn wood, the old photographs, the tools by the door. Everything had a place, a purpose. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. He glanced at Martha. Your husband built all this? She nodded. Every board. Said a house should be strong enough to stand through any storm. Jonas looked at the walls, then at her. Seems he was right. Martha smiled softly. He was. The kettle whistled again and Martha rose to pour more coffee. Jonas watched her move, feeling something shift quietly inside him, like the slow thaw of winter ground. He didn't say a word, but in that silence, something unspoken passed between them. Something fragile, true, and beginning to take root. The sun climbed higher, warm and golden over the valley. The storm had left behind a world washed clean. The mud was drying in the tracks of wagon wheels, and birds were singing again in the cottonwoods. Jonas stepped outside after breakfast. The dog followed him, tail wagging, still limping from a scrape, but crowed as if it had chased off the whole gang itself. Jonas squatted, scratching behind its ears. You're a brave one, he murmured. Reckon you earned your keep." He looked out across the fields. The fence was half broken, the soil wet and dark. He rolled his sleeves and went to work without a word. Martha watched from the doorway. She didn't stop him. She just leaned against the frame, arms folded, a quiet smile touching her lips. There was something steady about the way he worked, like each nail and board helped him lay down a bit of the weight he'd been carrying. Hours passed. By noon, he'd fixed half the fence. Sweat glistened on his forehead, and the old army coat hung from a post nearby. Martha came down the path with a jug of water and a clean rag. "You'll wear yourself out," she said, handing him the jug. He took a long drink and smiled faintly. "Feels good to do something that don't end in gunfire." She laughed quietly. "That's a kind of work we could use more of out here." For a moment, they stood together in the field, the quiet stretching between them, not awkward, just alive with something unspoken. Jonas looked toward the cabin. "This land, it means a lot to you." Martha nodded. "My husband dreamed of making something that would last. I couldn't let Finch take that away." Jonas looked at the repaired fence line, and then at her. "You didn't. You stood your ground." Her eyes softened. "Not alone." The dog barked once, breaking the silence. Martha smiled and turned back toward the house. "Dinner'll be ready soon. Don't be late." Jonas watched her walk away, the hem of her dress brushing the tall grass. The light caught her hair, and for a moment he felt something stir in him that he'd long forgotten. The quiet ache of belonging somewhere. He finished mending the fence and washed his hands at the pump. When he went back inside, the smell of stew filled the air. Martha had set the table, 2 bowls, 2 spoons, and a small lamp between them. They ate in comfortable silence. Every so often Martha would glance up and catch him looking at the fire, lost in thought. "You thinking about leaving?" she asked, finally. Jonas's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "I was," he admitted. "Before the sheriff came, before the storm broke. And now?" He looked around the small room, the glow of the lamp, the soft hum of the wind outside, the dog sleeping by the fire. "Now I don't know." Martha reached across the table, resting her hand lightly on his. "Maybe that's all right, not knowing." He looked down at her hand, then up into her eyes. "You're not afraid I'll bring more trouble?" She smiled faintly. "Trouble finds its way here no matter who's standing guard." "But you don't feel like trouble anymore?" Jonas didn't answer. He just nodded, a slow, thoughtful gesture. The fire crackled softly between them. Later that evening, as the sky turned orange and then deep purple, they stepped outside. The air was cool, the first stars beginning to show. Martha folded her arms, watching the light fade. "You know," she said, "when I first opened that door, I thought you were just another drifter looking for a meal." Jonas smiled slightly. "Guess I was. And now?" He looked out at the horizon. "Now I'm a man who owes a debt he can't pay. You gave me a roof, a reason to stand again." She turned toward him, her voice quiet. "You paid it already. You stayed when no one else would." For a long moment, they just stood there, the silence stretching like a bridge between them. Then Martha whispered, "You could stay longer, you know. There's always work here, always room." Jonas's eyes met hers. "You sure?" She nodded. "I've been alone long enough." He looked down, a faint smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. "Then maybe I'll stay, just till the fences hold through the next rain." Martha smiled back. That's all I ask. The night deepened around them, soft and calm. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass. From the cabin window, the lamplight glowed warm and steady, a sign of life in the wilderness. Jonas took a slow breath, the clean air filling his chest. Feels different tonight, he said. It is, Martha replied. The valley's quiet again. He nodded. And maybe so am I. For the first time in years, Jonas Pike didn't feel like a man on the run. He felt like a man who had found something worth staying for, even if only for a while. Dawn came soft and golden over Ash Hollow. Mist hung low across the fields, and the air smelled of damp earth and pine. The storm had passed for good this time, leaving everything calm and still. Jonas was already awake. He sat on the porch, rolling a cigarette between his fingers, but never lighting it. The dog lay beside him, snoring softly. His old army insignia rested on the porch rail, catching the first rays of the sun. Inside, Martha moved quietly, setting a kettle to boil. The sound of it whistling filled the small cabin, a peaceful rhythm that made the place feel alive again. She stepped outside, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "You're up early," she said gently. Jonas nodded. "Didn't sleep much." "You're thinking about leaving?" she said, not accusing, just knowing. He looked down at the insignia, turning it over in his hand. "I don't belong to much these days. Never did, really." Martha sat beside him on the steps. "You belonged here last night. That's something." He smiled a little. "Maybe, but folks like me don't stay long. Storms follow us, even when the sky's clear." She looked out at the horizon, where the sun was rising behind the distant ridge. "Maybe the storm's over for you now." Jonas didn't answer right away. The quiet stretched between them, filled only by birdsong and the crackle of the kettle inside. Finally, he said, "When I left the army, I swore I'd never fight again. But last night, I did, and for once it didn't feel wrong." Martha turned to him. "Because you weren't fighting for yourself. You were fighting for someone who believed you could be good again." He met her eyes, and something in his chest softened. "You think I can?" She smiled faintly. "You already are." Jonas looked away, blinking against the light. "You've got a kind way of seeing things." "Someone has to," she said. "Out here, the world'll turn hard if you let it." For a while, they just sat there, watching the valley wake. The sunlight spilled across the hills, catching the tops of the trees. The land looked different now, still wild, but not cruel. Jonas finally stood, stretching his sore shoulders. "I'll go tell the sheriff I'm moving on," he said softly. Martha rose, too, "if that's what you need." He looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to memorize her face. The quiet strength, the calm eyes, the peace she carried like a lantern in the dark. "You've been good to me, Martha." She shook her head. "No. You were just here when I needed someone who wouldn't walk away." Jonas's jaw tightened, and he nodded. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the tarnished army insignia. He held it in his palm, studying it one last time before setting it down on the porch rail. "I carried this too long," he said. "Let it belong to the dust, and now." Martha looked at the insignia, then at him. "You sure you don't want to keep it? It's part of who you were." He shook his head. "Not anymore." The wind picked up slightly, carrying the faint scent of sage and wildflowers. Jonas stepped off the porch and walked a few paces toward his horse, tied under the old oak tree. Martha followed him. "You'll need supplies," she said. "Bread, jerky, maybe some coffee beans." He smiled softly. "You always think ahead." "Someone has to," she said again. He took the reins, then hesitated. "You'll be all right?" Martha nodded. "The land's mine now. Finch's men won't be back. I'll manage." Jonas studied her for a moment, then said quietly, "If the world were fair, I'd have met you sooner." Martha's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "Maybe you came when you were meant to." Jonas mounted the horse slowly, the leather creaking under his weight. He looked down at her, the morning sun catching the lines of his face. "You take care, Martha Hensley." "You too, Jonas Pike," she said. "Wherever you ride." He tipped his hat, turned the horse, and started down the narrow trail. The valley opened before him, wide, golden, and endless. Martha stood there, watching until he became a small figure against the rising light. Then she turned back toward the cabin, where the kettle still steamed, and the dog waited by the door. On the porch rail, the army insignia glinted once in the sun before the breeze pushed it into the dirt below. Martha paused, then smiled softly. "Go on then," she whispered. "You've earned your peace." The wind carried her words down the valley, across the fields that were now truly hers. The world was quiet again, no thunder, no gunfire, only the steady hum of life beginning anew. And somewhere beyond the ridge, a lone rider disappeared into the morning light, free at last from the ghosts that once followed him. If you liked this story, don't ride off just yet. Hit subscribe, and stay with us for more tales of courage, love, and redemption from the Old West. Your next story's already saddled and waiting.